Welcome in to another episode of Betting the Pitch with your host, Real_G Warner, back to the soccer grindstone after match day one is in the books for England and France and Spain. Still not caught up on that yet. So if you're tweeting me about it, I will be checking in on that later. But today's episode will be on Serie A, the Italian top division in their football league in their country. We're going to go through each of the teams, the changes in the offseason, plus come out of here with an ultimate best bet end of show for the futures calendar and try to have something that we're going to root for the rest of the season. Futures were really good to me last year, so trying to keep that going. Of course, we'll be doing still have one more league that is yet to start of the Big Five in Europe, and that is the Bundesliga. Based on feedback, please let me know. Slide in some DMs, at the Real_G Warner on Twitter or on Instagram or on Patreon. Hit me up if you want anything extra to be covered. But I expect as we get closer to the Champions League, Europa League, Europa Conference League, I'll be doing futures episodes on each of those because I think that there's some value to be had there. Certainly, a lot of it depends on knockout round matches and two advances. That's where I had the most success last season. But trying to get the stage set for this season, I think it'll be better for me. And of course, better for all of you, hopefully. But I think ultimately getting to talk through these things with you all listening and getting your feedback helps to prepare me for a better season and hopefully more winners to come yours and my way. So in this episode, I'm going to go through and come up with a ultimate best bet end of show for Serie A futures. Also, if you're on YouTube, please hit subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a 5-star review. It means a lot for the search bar history or whatever it is, gets to be higher up the list. And if you haven't checked out my Patreon account, I highly recommend it. Patreon.com/Real_G Warner. It's where you can get direct access to me, my leans across all the sports, which I put out usually overnight or early in the morning, depending on what the heck I'm up to that day. And you can also interact with me throughout the day. My write-ups get posted. I notify my clients' subscribers there. I guess they call them patrons. But you get a little notification if you have the app when I'm putting a write-up in there, plus when I'm locking in each play. Turn on notifications, make sure you get up to the second updates. And I think if you're a subscriber to me on other platforms, I think you would fully believe that the price is very reasonable. So go check it out. And so let's get into it. All lines quoted in this podcast are courtesy of betonline.ag, my favorite place to get my bets down early. Reduced juice is offered on almost every game you want to bet right up until game time. Please follow the link found in the podcast description to fund your account. Use the promo code GW50 to receive 50% match bonus up to $1,000. Okay, so let's jump in. I'm going to start and go through. Looks like we have futures to win Serie A and also to finish top four. So I will pick something from there. But going to start going through the various teams, starting with the newest teams to Serie A, the newly promoteds. It looks like Frosinone is the weak link here. Their squad value is less than 25 million euros, which is pretty low. I believe they were Serie B champions last season, though, which is pretty incredible that a team with such a low value could win. So we'll see what happens with them. They probably will be needing to do some additions to their club to build up and come to a level to match the rest of the Italian top division. But as you've heard on all these futures podcasts, I really like the second division winners, in this case, Serie B, because ultimately it's really tough to finish first in a division. And I think it's a really good indicator for moving forward. Of course, I'm assuming a bunch of their players have been picked off by some of the bigger clubs. Maybe they had a bunch of loanees, all those sort of things. And seeing 24.25 million euros as their team value is very, very low. Puts them on par, I think, with a Luton Town as being so far off from the rest of the league and the English Premier League, because Cagliari, the second least valued club in Serie A, is worth it looks like more than double or about double. So that's not great. But we'll end up seeing how that all looks. And then let's, I guess, jump in. I'll try to lay the groundwork for what to expect, I guess, with this club. So looks like their manager is Eusebio Di Francesco, who was appointed in just July of this year. So a new manager comes in. That's a little bit problematic. I think suggests there might be some changes in how the team plays. And I think Coppa Italia's initial first round or whatever was this past weekend, which I did not catch. So if you want me to look at something, by the way, that I haven't mentioned on one of my podcasts, please check it out and let me know, because it's very possible. It's sometimes really hard to track what matches are being played and what leagues or cups or all these sort of things that are going on. I generally do a pretty good job, I think, keeping up with it. But if you see something that you think I would normally want to take an interest in, please send me something to real_G Warner on Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, wherever. And I will happily look into it. Also, that's part of one of the things on Patreon as well. You can make requests and let me know what you'd like me to look at, and I will happily do it. So Frosinone, new manager. When I look at the departures, I see Roberto Insigne's, I think, older brother, or just not as good brother, of Lorenzo Insigne, who went from Napoli to Toronto FC, and I think having a really terrible time of it in MLS. But that happens, I guess, when you're older and you make a move for money. But when I look at the arrivals for Frosinone, they have a goalkeeper on loan from Sassuolo, who I don't know. Luca Mazzatelli, a defensive midfielder from Monza, don't know him. Aroui, also from Sassuolo. Marchiza, seems like a lot coming in from Sassuolo, as well as a Milan transfer. And I think it speaks to, unless transfer market has just completely taken off the summer, specifically the Frosinone Calcio club, there's not a lot to expect there, unfortunately. And when I look at the squad, I don't see a lot of names that I really know, to be frank. They look very young, at least in the forward line, to say the least, and still trying to look through and try to come up with someone I've seen before. So it seems like a really young, new team. And I imagine that'll be something for a lot of Serie A to deal with, but probably is something they probably are looking forward to, because facing youth teams would be really nice, as ultimately 3 teams are going down to the Segunda Division or Serie B in Italy, in this type of spot. So based on the squad value and having a lot of players I've never seen before, my expectations are pretty low on Frosinone at this point. We'll see how that changes as we move forward. Now, Cagliari are next on the list. They are worth about double, just less than 49, or just above 48.5 million euros. I guess I don't know how much it matters to be that specific about values here, but Cagliari, they were a team in Serie A for a long time, went down, came straight back up. So that's a big step for them. When I'm looking at, so Claudio Ranieri, who's back from former, I believe, Premier League champion at Leicester City, and then had been at Sampdoria for a while. That wasn't working great. He's been around, 71 years old, clearly an expert, has been there a long time, and actually, or has been around the game a long time, and actually got appointed at the beginning of 2023, January 1st to be exact. So he's been around for a little bit in the Cagliari, I guess, side, helped bring them up after coming up in the second half of last season. And he's got a contract in 2025, so we'll see if that actually gets used, because those type of things don't seem to matter too often. But when I look at the squad, in Cagliari, they were a good team for sure. A couple seasons ago, they fought relegation really hard. The year before, they ended up going down. And they're I think an island club, and it's a tough place to go to because it involves a fair amount of travel, considering most of these European nations are not very large, at least not compared to the US. Like a Major League Baseball team going from the East Coast to West Coast is really significant. Not much of that, I think, happens in soccer necessarily, but we'll see, I guess, what happens there. When I look at the departures from the squad, we have Raul Bellanova, who now is at Torino, who I think was at Inter Milan last season. Also Alessio Cragno, who had moved, I guess, moved to Monza. Valukevic has moved to Empoli, center back, who is a name that I've seen certainly, and those are the biggest names I think that they've lost, which are not small names at all. They brought in Eldor Muradulov from Roma, who was, I think, on loan to Spezia last season. Also Ibrahim Sulemana from Hellas Verona. And then some of these other names, I do know the Tommaso Augello name, who left back, who moved in from Sampdoria, but he seemed to be a player that was aging on a Sampdoria squad that was really struggling so much. And they paid 1.1 million for Alessandro Di Pardo, who's a name I don't know from Juventus. So they've done some additions, paid $1 million to Roma to loan Shomurodov. I imagine that was probably in a competition for other clubs were in competition for that. So at least they're investing in their club, but ultimately they're still second least valuable in the entire Serie A, and that's going to be a hard thing to overcome. When I look at their squad, I see Pavoletti at center forward, captain, still there, 34 years old. Certainly some questions about how he'll produce at that type of age. Gianluca Lapadula, who was at Lecce for a little while amongst all these other teams across Italy. He looks to be injured, though, at the moment. We'll see how serious that is. Ankle surgery. That's not a great sign. Return unknown. Shomurodov is a really talented player that I feel like just hasn't been able to break into the Roma squad. He's from Uzbekistan and had played a pretty big role for Spezia last season. We'll see how that ends up turning here. We have Jakub Jankto I think moved from Getafe in Spain after leaving Italy to go there for a very brief stay. Also came out as homosexual, I think. So good for him. Hopefully he has a really big career, because I think that's important for sport. As I move higher, Marko Roj, he looks injured, a Croatian midfielder, cruciate ligament injury. That's not a good thing in soccer. It seems like it takes a really long time to come back from that. We have Goldaniga in center back. And then not really a ton of other names that I really know. It looks like they brought in a goalkeeper, paid or it's worth 2 million euros from Cluj in Romania. It looks like they paid 800,000 for it. So it's pretty much a weakened squad. Not certainly the big names that I would have seen from seasons before. That's a little bit alarming, but and as well as trying to, I guess, acclimate to a much higher level in Serie A after coming off of season in Serie B. But we'll see what happens with Cagliari. I would expect that they are one of the favorites to go down here as well. Next, I'll move to Lecce, who did stay up after winning Serie A, or excuse me, winning Serie B 2 seasons ago. They were able to stay in the league. It was not as stressful towards the end, but it was a big fight for a lot of the season. And I felt Lecce were really competitive with a lot of the top clubs, only to concede late. So we'll see if they can improve that this season. They're worth about 65 million euros. So almost 3 times as much as Frosinone, a little more than Cagliari, about 20 or 16 or 17 million or so. And then the next jump is Hellas Verona at 72. So it's a little bit more competitive there. With Lecce, I would expect that they've returned a lot. Roberto De Verza was appointed in June of 2023. So that is a manager switch. And I don't really know necessarily why that happened, unless the previous manager was given a promotion to a bigger club in Italy, which, I mean, certainly for keeping a team like Lecce up after being promoted directly was a big deal, and certainly could get you a bigger job. When I look at departures, it looks like Hulman has left, who was, I believe, a captain for Lecce, and has moved on to Sporting Lisboa in Portugal. So that's a little bit of a move, but they paid 18 million euros for it. So I don't blame them for that. Other names on this list, Simone Romagnoli has left, but it was only 100,000. So I don't even know. It might be confusing a Romagnoli with another Romagnoli. So it doesn't seem like a ton has been lost from Lecce. In terms of arrivals, they brought in Yusuf Malé from Fiorentina, who's a good player, but hadn't seemed to always played a lot. For 5.5 million euros. They brought in Vladimiro Falcone, a goalkeeper from Sampdoria, for 4 million euros. Also, Marin Pongracic, center back from Wolfsburg, who was, I think, loaned out to Borussia Dortmund last season. Was pretty disappointing. Also brought in Lorenzo Venuti, a right back from Fiorentina. So it seems like they're rating Fiorentina quite a bit, which might have been cast-offs for players that they were trying to move along. But so they have spent some money, use that 18 million euros. It seems like they spent probably about 11 of it. So probably trying to bail out some of their financials, but also building the team a bit. I see Cisse there, a center forward, important player there as well. Strefessa was so good last season for Lecce. Had a little bit of a kind of slower middle of the season, I think, but I believe in Lecce, I feel like they were very competitive last year, certainly under a new manager. I want to see what it looks like. But I do like that they've added to the squad. They did lose a captain, which is an important part, but seemingly when you can trade one player for three others that are from bigger clubs that have been in the top flight, that's an important thing to do. We'll see how good Martin Pongracius is, because he's got a lot of mistakes in him, unfortunately, this time in the Bundesliga in Germany. But we'll see. New goalkeeper as well. Always a question mark, but 28-year-old worth 5 million euros according to Transfer Market. So that's a better sign than I think the alternative. Next, I'll move to Hellas Verona, who I'd mentioned before, worth nearly 73 million euros, with Empoli only at 75.5 right before it. So we're getting a little bit closer, though. There's a big gap to the next group above them. So I'll start with, I guess, with Hellas Verona. And they were a club that really struggled last season to even stay in the league. I think they had to win the playoff because they basically instituted, if the teams are tied on points, it didn't matter about goal differential, there was going to be a playoff. Probably a brilliant move financially for Serie A. Just have another match day you could sell, essentially. But Hellas Verona, they were in the thick of it, bottom of the league for a while. They did appoint a new manager, Marco Baroni, which I want to say was from Lecce. Let me see if I'm right about that. But he started in July of this year, so a lot of changes have been made. He came up from Lecce. I was right. Okay, great. So the new Lecce manager should know Lecce pretty well, or former Lecce manager, excuse me, now at Hellas Verona, should know Lecce pretty well. Pretty good example of like Bayern Munich's strategy of just buying the best players in the Bundesliga in Germany and putting them on their roster, so you weaken their team while strengthening yours. A little bit of that strategy feels like it is here. When I look at departures, Ivan Ilic has left for Torino, sold for almost 16 million euros. Giovanni Simeone to Napoli for 12 million. Gianluca Caprari for 7.5. Matteo Cancelleri for almost 8 million euros. Adrian Tamez to Torino for almost 3 million. So like those are some big departures and for a lot of money, which is kind of funny for a squad that was fighting relegation the whole season last year. But maybe that speaks to kind of the struggles they were having. They did bring in Federico Bonazzoli on a free transfer from Salernitana, center forward. Also Andre Duda, who had been at Cologne, plus a bunch of other places, other stops around the Bundesliga. Good player, but kind of temperamental and seemingly a little bit mercurial, I think you could say. Also Yaya Colon from Genoa, which is interesting because they just came into Serie A as well. Yet we haven't gotten to them yet because they've clearly spent some money on their club. Ricardo Saponara is a big signing from Fiorentina, as well as Jordi Mbula, a right winger from Mallorca, who I don't really know. I gotta be honest about that one. When I look at the rest of their squad, they have Jadon Broff, center forward, who they took from a youth team at Borussia Dortmund. So that's pretty big signing there. Thomas Henry, who had been playing for Venezia and other clubs as well. He has a cruciate ligament, though, so he's probably going to be injured for a little while. I mean, there's some good players. Aydin Rustic from, I think, Eintracht Frankfurt. There's a lot of good players in this. Darko Lazovic, who's probably their most important player, 32 years old now and a little bit older. The Serbian has a hamstring injury, so we'll see when he comes back. Martin Ongla returned from loan to Valladolid in a team that went down. I mean, there's a lot of good players in this team. There's a lot of talent here. Maybe under the new manager, they'll do a lot better than they did last year, and not have to fight relegation like they did. But I guess that's a really big question. We'll see how that goes. But I would expect Verona to be better than they were last year, especially after they should be pretty motivated and kind of feel that sense of desperation from the beginning after how poorly everything started. But it's kind of a miracle they stayed in the league, and good for them. Next, I'll move to Empoli. As I mentioned, just a little bit over 75.5 million euros in value. They're a squad that's been kind of a surprise to stay in Serie A, but good for them. Their manager, Paolo Zanetti, was appointed in 2022. So he's back for another season, previously from Venezia, I believe. And they did do a lot of business this summer. They sold their goalkeeper Vicario to Tottenham Hotspur for 20 million euros. Christian Aslani, defensive midfielder, to Inter. Fabiano Parisi, a left back, for 10 million to Fiorentina, which I think was a rumor that he was going to go to Juventus. So a little bit surprising there. Nadine Bayrami to Sassuolo for 6 million. Filippo Bandinelli for 2.5. And that's where the list stops. There might have even been more. So they've sold a lot. In terms of what they brought in Luperto, a center back from Napoli, but he was already, I think, playing for this team. They just, I think, completed that deal. Sebastian Walukiewicz from Cagliari was already in the squad. Daniel Maldini on loan from AC Milan is a good move for trying to get a younger, potentially scoring attacker. Giuseppe Pizzella from Parma is a free transfer at left back. So they haven't really put much money into the club, but have sold a lot. So that's a big concern right away. When I look at their squad, I mean, Kong, I believe, was at one of the clubs that went down last season. And we got Caputo, who's in good goal scorer. Piccoli, who's I think on loan from Atalanta. He's potentially a really good 22-year-old great goal scorer. And that seems to be where they're building, which is, I guess, one of those things with a lot of the poorer clubs in these top divisions, that they have to sell their best players and they end up loaning young ones. And hopefully they catch some lightning in a bottle with those. I'm interested to see what Maldini offers. He's certainly going to be, I think, is from very, very rich blood within the Italian football history or calcio history. Definitely some questions about what they're going to look like. Razvan Marin, who had moved from Calcio, or I guess is on loan. Wow, interesting that he's on loan. Maybe I guess he was on loan last year as well. That seems to maybe a 2-year loan. That's interesting, especially with Cagliari coming up this season. But yeah, it looks like he's on loan to the end of 2024. So at the end of the season, really like Petr Stojanovic, a Slovenian right back, but has some competition in there with Obue in there, as well as Kasache on the other side. An Australian, I think, international. I mean, there's some good talent in this squad. A lot of solid players. Also feel like Empoli were a team that scored a ton of goals a couple seasons ago, and then kind of morphed into a more defensive side this past season, but stayed in the league and weren't really under huge threat. So we'll see if they can do that again. Next, we'll move to Salernitana. They're worth nearly 100 million euros at 95.93. Very specific. They had one of the greatest escapes, I think, in Italian football history, at least since I've been watching a couple seasons ago. Have retained Paulo Sousa, who was appointed in February of 2023, and had a really good run, and they were one of the most dynamic goal-scoring teams. A lot behind their striker Boulaïdia, who has been, I guess, further transfer. So he was on loan from Villarreal, and I paid 12 million euros for him. So that's a pretty big expenditure. They haven't really sold much. Bonazzoli is center forward on loan to LS Verona, but doesn't really seem like anything else they sold was registering or was ringing any sort of register. Arrivals, they brought in Pirola, from a center back from Inter Milan. I don't know him very well, so he must be younger. Also, Antonio Candreva, who had been around last season, was playing really well for Salernitana despite a very aged player. And it looks like Benoit Costil has come in from Lille, who I think was on loan to Bordeaux, or was played at Bordeaux for a while, was on loan to another team in Ligue 1 last season. So they've done a lot of investing while a lot of other teams around have sold. So that's interesting. Boulaïdia is still one of the best players in this division. At least he was last season. I believe in him wholeheartedly. Candreva at 36 still can do it. We'll see how long he can keep that going. But it was very impressive last year. I mean, there's a lot of big names that are still around. Bohinen, Koulibaly, both in central midfield. And I mean, there's plenty of good players here. Dylan Braun, center back. Came over from Metz in Liga. Not sure he's the probably biggest name I should highlight, but I had good experiences with him for Metz a couple seasons ago. Flavius Daniliuk, who was, I think, came over from Nice, I want to say. He had a surgery recently. We'll see how long he's out. And then Memo Ochoa, who's been one of the best goalkeepers, was really, really big for Salernitana last season. Played all summer, really, for Mexico. 38 years old. Doesn't seem like he's giving up anytime soon. They have Luigi Giuseppe and Benoit Costil, all goalkeepers, 32 and older. And we'll see what that is turning into. But I guess if you got 3 old guys, maybe one will be healthy at all times. Next, we'll move to Genoa, who are still below that $100 million mark, but just at 96.15 million euros. They're a new team to Serie A after going down, but we're only down for one season. Alberto Gilardino is their manager, only 41 years old. That's pretty young. Was appointed in the winter of 2022. So he's been around for a little bit, half the season or so. They really lost a defensive midfielder Lipani to Sassuolo, and then Yaga Colonna, right winger, to LS Verona, for combined less than 11 million euros in sales. They paid 12 million for a center forward, Matteo Retegui from Tigre, wherever that is. I'm not sure. And also Radu Dragoshin, center back that they bought from Juventus, who had been playing in another club in Serie A, if I remember correctly. Also have Aaron Martin in, who's from Mainz, free transfer. Morten Torsby, center midfielder, I believe Norwegian from Union Berlin, who's a decent player and really big on the climate change initiative. I guess that's why he wears number 2. Junior Macias in on loan from AC Milan. Just feels like there are too many wingers on that team. So, and he has some ability on that left foot. So that's interesting. They've spent more, as you would expect, climbing divisions. We'll see if they can consolidate that or turn that into a better squad. They also have a very famous name in Romanian, George Puskás, who I believe came over from Reading, I think that is, in England. So they got Yeboah, who came over from Augsburg, who was on loan to Augsburg last season while they're in the lower division. So there's some talent here. Kevin Strootman still there after leaving Marseille. I mean, there's plenty of names here. Stefan Ilsanker coming over from previously of Eintracht Frankfurt in the Bundesliga, Austrian. I mean, there's some big names here, to say the least. So we'll see if they're past their prime and whether they can keep that going. Johan Vazquez, who is on loan at Cremonese in Serie A, Mexican, is back. Conny de Winter on loan from Juventus, who seemingly can never seem to grab a spot with the big club, but was on loan, I think, last year at Empoli. Dragoshin, as I've already mentioned. So, I mean, there's plenty of names here in this team, and it probably speaks to their club value. They look like a team. I mean, they're so worth, let's see, nearly 100 million, double what Cagliari are worth, almost 4 times what Frosinone are worth. So that's pretty big and a good sign for Genoa to potentially stay in the league as one of the, I think they pride themselves as the oldest football club in Serie A. I believe we're started as a cricket club and also are called El Grifone, which has a special name in my heart, as you could probably expect. Next, I'll move to Monza, who were probably my favorite team in Serie A last season. Pretty much just bet them and just kept betting them over and over again because they covered every time they played. Had some big wins all over the place, and it was really impressive. Rafael Palladino, still there, 39 years old, was appointed in 2022, beginning of that season, it seemed, and it's still been around. So some good continuity in that team there. In terms of their sales, they let Mazzatelli go. I don't know that name. Alessio Crodno is on loan to Sassuolo, goalkeeper, which is something meaningful. Definitely have to replace that. But really, their other losses, I can't really say a lot. Gaitjar on a free transfer to Venezia, hasn't mean a lot to me. Arrivals, Matteo Pessina, who they bought last season, I think started his career at Monza, came back and was awesome for them in the center of midfield. Andrea Patagna as well, a center forward from Napoli, big man who's really a backup forward, but played pretty well for Monza in the starts last season, as well as Gianluca Comprari, good goal scorer. Pablo Mari, who survived some weird knife attack in a terrorist type activity in a grocery store, and of course it hit a soccer player of all people. But center back, I guess, had finished his move from Arsenal. So there's not a lot has changed with this club. It's kind of seeming like they've kept the squad, and why would you change, considering how well they played, especially versus expectations? There's still a side I want to look to back as much as possible this season until things change. Certainly question what they're going to do, and especially with a lot of other teams that have changed who they are. But Michel Di Gregorio is very good as goalkeeper last season, worth about 8 million euros at 26 years old. So I'm not as worried about loaning out their goalkeeper. That was pretty famous as well. And this seems like a squad that I'm looking to back really until things change. I love the fire that Armando Izzo plays with, and so that's a pretty nice addition as well. Just came over from Torino. So, and also Danilo D'Ambrosio is another name I have to mention, who is a little bit on the outside looking in of the Inter Milan rotation, but certainly has goals in him as a center back, fullback type of mixture. So I really like Monza. Don't see any reason to change that kind of theory moving forward. Next, I'll move to Bologna, who they're worth about 150 million euros, just south of 148. They're a good team last year. Seemingly always struggle to score goals, but I guess are one of the bigger clubs in Italian football, and are worth a lot more than the teams at the bottom. So Thiago Motta is there, and he was really an offensive manager that came over from Spezia a couple seasons ago, and I think really came in early in 2022 season, but I think it was after it started, September 12th, it looks like. And he's going to try to bring an offense to a Bologna side that hasn't really had it for a while. When I look at departures, no names that I really know. I got to say, seemingly pretty low. Sold a right back for $3 million to AZ Alkmaar in the Netherlands, but that doesn't say much to me. Stefan Posch, they kept him after buying him or loaning him from Hoffenheim. Sam Bukema from AZ Alkmaar, so it's almost like they did a trade with some extra cash, as they paid $9 million and only got $3 million back for the right back earlier. Dan Ndoye, don't know, but paid $8 million from Basel. Nicolo Moro, don't know that name, and Osama El Azouzi from Union Saint-Gilloise from Belgium is saying something, because that squad was good, and I keep seeing these very good players that are popping up everywhere. I guess one name that's gone now, Gary Medel, is a name I've seen. Chilean, who has moved probably back towards South America, is my guess. To Vasco da Gama, that'd be my guess, as well as Roberto Soriano is looking like he's without club, as is Nicola Sansone. So it's almost like this squad. Also, Lewis Binks has moved at center back on loan to Coventry. So seemingly they're getting a little bit younger, or getting the older players out. We'll see what that all looks like. Orsolini's picked up an injury, adductor tear, so we'll see how long that keeps him out. It's scary. Marko Arnautovic, one of the most dynamic center forwards in all of international football, certainly for the Austrian, but also we'll see what he is able to deliver. He was hurt a lot of last season at 34 years old, probably on the wrong side of his career. Musa Barrow still there, incredible talent, a lot of speed, pace in the left wing. Orsolini, as I mentioned, already injured, so we'll see what that looks like. Midfield is pretty deep. We'll see how that all, I guess, who plays a ton. And then when I'm looking at the center backs, Sumoro's got a lot of mistakes in him. He's 31 years old and has a patella rupture. That's not great. He's out for a long time, but probably isn't a huge loss, assuming they can fill in with Lukumi, a center back from it looks like Colombia. Also, Kevin Bonifazi had played a lot last season as well. So we'll see. Lucas Skorupski, also back in goal, was pretty solid for a lot of last season. Still had some howlers in him, of course. But I guess that's something that happens with goalkeepers, especially those that are under pressure a lot. Next, we'll move to Udinese Calcio. They're worth about 156 million euros. They're tied, I think, forever with Watford, same owners. So we'll see how that kind of comes in, because a lot of times they're exchanging players, it seems. Andrea Sotil still around, was really great to start last season for Udinese, but then they kind of trailed off, maybe due to lack of depth or something like that. They sold Rodrigo Bacau, their center back, who's one of the most physical and probably one of the most identified as Udinese players, at least for me, in my mentals, when I'm thinking of the black and white, the Bianconeri, I believe. Though I guess that also could be Juventus. But anyway, sold for 8.31 million euros Fenerbahce in Turkey. Also, they lost another center back, Benkovic, to Trabzonspor for 500K on loan in Turkey as well. So that's a little bit surprising. Also, Roberto Pereira, who's one of their best players, is without a club and has moved on. I'm kind of surprised to see that. So there's some losses there, especially some big names. When I look at the rest of the squad, in terms of what they brought in, Jordan Zamora, left back from Bournemouth, free transfer. So that must have been his contract was up. Brenner, a center forward, 10 million euros from a club in, looks like Holland. Or nope, Cincinnati. Oops, my bad. And then other names, I don't really know many of these, I got to say. So who knows what the deal is with additions. It feels like maybe money's tight, or they're spending more on Watford this season. We'll see about Gerard Deulofeu. He would be a huge returning, like almost like this great buy of a player, but he's coming back off a knee surgery. So we'll see what he's going to look like. Still have success, as well as Beto, two really good attackers. Florian Thauvin had come over back from Mexico, or back to Europe from Mexico, formerly of Marseille. And so there's plenty of good players here. I think, I mean, definitely some questions in what they've lost in the highly well-known players, and seeing how leadership and things of that nature go coming forward. But Bijol had played pretty well at center back for them last year, and probably made taking the money a little bit easier on the center back I mentioned earlier, Bacau. But also they have Hezebue, who's a good fullback with speed, but he's recovering from a cruciate ligament. Looks like he should be back in the next month or so. We'll see how that all goes. I feel like Injury recoveries sometimes take a long time, but it might have been that just had a glut of center backs. It seems like they're pretty deep there, so maybe not so bad to move Bacau on. Though I think they're going to have to really prove that they're still a good defense. And really, they're a front-footed attacking team under Sotil, their manager. So we'll see how that goes. Next, I'll move to Sassuolo. Speaking of teams that don't really care too much about defense, started, at least when I was following this club, with De Zerbi, and really has been taken on by every subsequent manager. Sassuolo worth about a little over 150, so 157 million euros, pretty close to Udinese Calcio as well, as we keep climbing the squad value chart. They have Alessio Dionisi still around, has been at Sassuolo since the beginning of the 2022 season, really the end of the 2021 season. They sold Raspadori to Napoli, but that had already essentially been done. Locatelli to Juventus, Ahmed Juno Traoré to Bournemouth. Davide Fratesi is a new one on loan, 6 million euros to Inter Milan. So that's one. The rest had pretty much all moved on previously. So not a lot there to report back on, though there's probably some other sales that weren't as high dollar lucrative type of situations. They did spend a lot of money, though, brought in Pinamonti from Inter Milan, who I think was on loan at Torino or maybe at Salernitana, probably Salernitana, but their colors are the same. So it's tough for me to distinguish. They also brought in Vigna on loan, who had been playing, I think, with Bournemouth in the Premier League, but loaned out from Roma. Also, Nedim Bayrami from Empoli, step up for him in terms of probably wages and things of that nature. So they've invested some of that money. Certainly did more selling than they've been buying, but that's been the Sassuolo way for a long time. Questions about their squad, or excuse me, their fan base and support at home, but usually it's pretty good on the road. And they still have Domenico Berardi, who's one of the best players for the Italian international team. Or national team. So that's a big piece for them. Really love the business they did in buying Loriente from Lorient in France. So they've always been a really good attacking team. Biggest questions on their defense. And I don't think that's really changed too much. It's still a big question for me. Ferrari, a captain, don't really trust him, I got to say. And they've been trying to find, I think, younger center backs to really move on from Ferrari at 31 years old. And I think he was on loan and out at another club last year, if I'm not mistaken. I might be. But that's the biggest question for me. They did bring in Alessio Kranjov, and he will probably compete with Consigli for the leader or the number one goalkeeping job. Consigli at 36 years old, certainly one that might be slowing down a little bit. Next, I'll move to Torino. They're worth 171 or so million euros. And then we get behind them to teams that are all above 250. So we're going to start climbing this, and it's going to get pretty steep pretty quickly. Torino were pretty good last year. Ivan Juric still around. Didn't expect him to be only 47 years old, but he's been there for a while. And a great manager, and seemingly has had fairly good success, wants to control the ball. And I think that's a really good thing for a squad that really wants to finish mid-table or potentially flirt with Europe. Departures, they lost Ola Aina to Nottingham Forest. Armando Izzo had left for Monza. Colne, I don't really know. The rest of the names I don't really know. So that seems pretty good. They haven't sold a lot. They spent a fair amount. Ivan Ilic coming in from Hellas Verona, formerly managed by Ivan Juric, I would imagine. Nikola Vlasic coming from West Ham, though I think he arrived in January. Raul Bellanova from Cagliari, but was playing at Inter last season. Tamez, also a former player for Juric at Hellas Verona. And then Nemanja Radonjic from Marseille had come over, I think, before last season, or at least in the middle of last season. So not a ton of moves either way, which should give us a team that was pretty good last season. A lot of big names here that I would trust. Another question is really how they really more so for Torino, they possess the ball, so that kind of protects their defense. But how often are they able to score goals? That's the biggest question. Looks like they have Ricardo Rodriguez listed as a center back. Maybe the left center back is probably more accurate, still playing three at the back. And then it looks like Milinkovic Savic, their goalkeeper, is injured. He's got a biceps injury. That's scary a little bit, because we'll see what happens. I don't really know the keepers behind him. So that's a concern. And now we'll move to the big boys, really. We'll start with Lazio at over a quarter billion total market value in euros, 256 and change. Really good side last year, finished second in the league, I think, if I'm not mistaken, behind really good defense under Maurizio Sarri. He's still around. Kind of play some boring football, but really not that boring because they do really well. And they're a team I want to back, especially if they're going to be treated without the respect they deserve from how well they performed last season. Serie Milinkovic-Savic has moved on for 40 million euros, I think, to Saudi Arabia. That's disappointing. Francesco Acerbi to Inter Milan was playing a big role for them last year, so that's not new. Other departures really had moved on before and weren't really that meaningful. They did bring in Daichi Kamada from Eintracht Frankfurt, who's a great attacking player. Kind of fell out a little bit, especially when he said he wasn't going to stay at Frankfurt last season. I'm very happy to see him. Forgot he had moved there. Tati Castellanos, who'd come over from New York City, I believe, but was part of the Man City group and was, I think, at Girona last season in La Liga in Spain. Other names I don't really know too much about, but they spent nearly $8 million on Cancelleri, right winger from Hellas Verona. So that's meaningful, as well as a right winger, Gustav Isaacson from, I think, Midtjylland in Denmark, I want to say, for 12 million. So that's a pretty big expense. So they've definitely paid some money for their attackers, used some of that money from Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, who really wasn't a big name goal scorer for them. It's always been Ciro Immobile, honestly, but it's one of those things where I think he's probably going to show up and his absence will be felt a lot more than would be expected. They still have great goal scoring talent. Looks like Castellanos will probably come in behind Immobile, which is probably good because they're going to be fighting in Champions League as well. But Felipe Anderson's still there. I mean, there's a lot of great attacking talent here for a team that really prides itself on defense. So we'll see what Kamada does. He's certainly not the physical presence, not nearly as tall as Milinkovic-Savic, SMS, but ultimately Kamada, and I think like a lot of Japanese players, will work really hard and has a lot more attacking talent than I think a lot of people would expect. Probably rotates a little bit with Luis Alberto, who's 30 years old, getting pretty old. But we'll see how that all kind of comes together. And based on how well the defense played last season, I think we have to trust it to continue that way. They have pretty deep goalkeeping room with Provedel and Maximiano. Provedel basically winning the job last year, and so no reason to give that up considering how well he played. Next, I'll move to Fiorentina, who have climbed over Lazio, which is a little bit surprising, at $750 million euros, at 275 million euros. Fiorentina looks like they've been spending, certainly sold some players off. Vincenzo Italiano is still there, been around for a little while, so that's good. They brought in Arturo Cabral, but he was already around actually from Benfica. These are who left. Cabral left makes more sense, to Benfica for 20 million euros. It's very expensive for a player that was kind of a second choice, I thought. Igor to Brighton and Hove Albion in the Premier League is a loss. Male to Lecce is interesting. Terzic, who left to looks like Red Bull Salzburg, I want to say, in Austria for $5.5 million. Also, Zerkowski has left. So I mean, they've sold a fair amount, but they brought in Lucas Beltran from, that looks like, River Plate, I want to say, yes, in Argentina. Center forward, 25 million euros. That's pretty expensive. Basically spent almost all of what they got for a Cabral for a younger player. Artemelo has arrived on loan, 2 million from Juventus, formerly of Barcelona, and really hasn't been playing much at all anywhere. Spent to buy Enzola, I think, from Spezia, who had gone down. Also Fabiano Parizzi, left back from Empoli, who Juventus definitely wanted, and brought in Yerry Mina on a free transfer. So they've been investing a fair amount. I still have some questions about who Fiorentina are, and I really never believed in their goal scoring. Maybe they're better than I would expect, but Luka Jovic is always up and down, but it's got great talent, clearly, and they brought in a lot of players. So they're definitely investing, and that's a good thing for fans of that club and looking at them going forward. I think bringing Yerry Mina at 28, I mean, he's not expensive for a free transfer, to say the least. Kind of fallen out of favor at Everton, who have certainly been struggling. But I mean, there's some reason to be bullish on Fiorentina. I guess I should give them a little more credit. And I don't know that I did very well against them last season. Climb to Roma now, above 300 million euros. They had a good season last year. Jose Mourinho, the special one, still there. Were great until the final against Sevilla in the Europa League final. Mourinho almost delivered another trophy. Good for them. But I'll stop his accolades because he's certainly a curmudgeon or someone difficult to deal with. In terms of departures, they lost Roger Ibanez for 28.5 million euros to Saudi or something like that. I don't know who would pay that type of number unless you have oil money. Justin Kluivert has left, but he was also gone previously, I think, at Valencia, I want to say last season, and he's now at Bournemouth. Matias Vinha has left on loan to Sassuolo. Tahirovic has left for Ajax. Volpato, I don't know that name, but looks a bit younger, like an investment for Sassuolo. But they brought in Evan Ndika, center back, for free from Eintracht Frankfurt. He's a good player, good athlete. We'll see, especially under Mourinho, if he can make him into a potential star, because I think there's a lot of ability there. Hossein Aouar, a huge buy for free, who was going to go for like 89 million euros or something like that to Arsenal a couple of years ago. And really, I think him wanting to make that move to leave Olympique Lyonnais in France really caused some problems for his development. We'll see if he can get remotivated, because he's a great talented player in central midfield. And also Rasmus Christensen has come in on loan from Leeds after they went down to the championship. Tammy Abraham looks like he's got an injury designation next to him, cruciate ligament, so he's gone till January. That's disappointing. Roma are really talented in a lot of different areas and have a great manager, so I really like them as an underdog, and still probably feel that way. Seem a little light up front right now based on their squad, and replacing Tammy is going to be tough, but Paulo Dybala, keeping him healthy is very important. Pellegrini's still there, and they're going to be a good squad yet again. Moving now to Atalanta, who I'm a little surprised to see valued so much more highly than Roma at nearly 339 million euros. But I guess that's how it goes. They are certainly talented, did not have Europe last year, and I think that helped them to be a little bit more focused on Serie A. When I look at their squad, they still should have the white-haired magician Gianpiero Gasperini. He's still around, been there since 2016, despite some rumors he might not be. They sold Rasmus Højlund for 75 million euros to Manchester United. Jeremy Boga to Nice. Pessina made that move happen to Monza. Ruslan Malinovsky to Marseille, but that already happened. And then most recently, left back, they sold to Wolfsburg and Joachim Male, who's a pretty big loss for them. They've really made themselves by having attacking fullbacks, and now pretty much all those players are gone. They did bring in El Bilal Touré from Unión Deportivo Almeria in Spain for 28 million euros. That's a big expense. Also spent 25 million to get Gianluca Scamacca back to Italy from West Ham, which wasn't really working there, but that's another big expense. Michel Bakker, great offensive-minded left back, is probably going to fill that Joachim Male's position from Bayer Leverkusen. I'm interested to see how much he's going to score, because I think it's going to be something that he certainly does, because defense is not a big part of the fullback's idea for Mitchell Bakker. Is really a winger that plays left back. Brought in Sead Kolasinac, who's also going to play that left side, so we'll see how that works out. Probably one for Europe, one for depth. And then Michel Aldopo, who's come in as a free transfer from Torino at central midfield. I don't know that name, but Atalanta, I always trust to score goals. Don't really trust to defend super well. They've got the 32-year-old Colombians in Duvan Zapata and also Luis Muriel. We'll see how much they get out of them this season. Of course, Ademola Lookman was so good last season. Has really been so good for a lot of his career. Just never seemed to latch on anywhere. They added Kovalenko as well from Spezia, who had gone down or had been on loan there, I guess. Pasalic still around, big goal threat for Croatia. So there's so much in this team that's really great. I'm looking to back them as much as I can in Europe. Also love the Brendan Soppy ad. We'll see how well they defend and see what they do at right back. That's a big question for me at this point. I guess it might be just Soppy's job with, I guess, Zappacosta there as well. 31, getting a little bit older. Got a 31 and a 20-year-old you can probably rotate. So should be a good squad. Brought in Carnesecchi, who's goalkeeper at Cremonese last season. I guess returned after a loan there. Juan Musso, we'll see if he can keep the job this year, because I think that was an expectation coming in. Certainly bullish on Atalanta moving forward, but they do have to balance Europe. Juventus then come in, which is pretty interesting to see them at fourth on the list in terms of market value of their squad. Only, way like 150 million euros higher than Atalanta, nearly 500 million euros. But this is not the same Juventus. They had the big points penalty last season they settled with. and missed out on Champions League. So this is going to be an interesting year for him, because I got to say the Thursday competitions are really tough. Allegri's still around, tries to win every match 1-0. Not great if you're trying to back anybody as a favorite, certainly. I do like that for unders, and played a lot of those with Juventus. And as an underdog, also does play, but not as a big favorite. When I look at their departures, Kulusevski had already left. Artur Melo, not a big loss. Roder Dragoshin had already been playing somewhere else. Di Maria leaving for Benfica is interesting, and that kind of hurts, but probably they need to shed some salary. Also, Juan Cuadrado moving to Inter Milan must hurt and feels weird, but he was a big part of them, and I think they weren't going to offer him a contract. He's an aging. Mosa Can still around. Locatelli, they'd already purchased. Timothy Weah was a pretty big addition, only 11.3 million euros, so that's pretty cheap. Milik was still around, and Facundo Gonzalez from Valencia, I don't know. But Weah was showing that he could probably even fill in as a right winger and play that right back position that Juan Cuadrado was playing for so long. I think he wants to play up top, but certainly can show his pace and ability on that right wing as a right fullback, potentially against the weaker clubs in Italy. Who knows what's going to happen with Vlahovic? They spent a lot of money on him and certainly haven't reaped the rewards of that, but only 23 years old, good chance that he improves. Yawns are back. Marco Piacca has come back. Maybe come in. Chiesa, keeping him healthy is probably the most important player on the whole team. I mean, this team is stacked. There's so many good players. They spend a lot of money on, or paying Pogba a lot of money. We'll see if he's even available or what they do with him. Rabiot stuck around despite potentially going to Manchester United. I mean, the squad's deep. It's got a lot of talent in it. The center backs are old. Bonucci is still on the roster at 36 years old. Danilo looks like the captain now at 32. There's some questions. Chesney is still very good, despite having some peaks and valleys last season. Still a good goalkeeper, and Perrine behind him, I think, is also pretty good. But older keepers, so we'll see how they hold up. I kind of am interested in seeing how down the market is on Juventus, because they are ultimately a side that has had such great success, dominated Serie A for like a decade. And I think they could kind of return back to that sometime soon. Inter Milan, only 4 million euros more valuable than Juventus, despite being Champions League runner-ups and winning the Coppa Italia last season. Really liked them, backed them in the final, felt like they deserved to potentially even knock off City. Simone Inzaghi was really not popular for a lot of his time last season until the kind of the run to the Champions League final and winning the Coppa Italia. Even then, people were still questioning him. Formerly manager of Lazio, and kind of came in after Antonio Conte won Serie A, and was pretty tough for him to kind of compete with that. They had plenty of departures, lost their goalkeeper Onana to Manchester United. Skriniar left on a free transfer to PSG. Brozovic left for older for sure, but left for Saudi Arabia. Pinamonti is gone, but he was already on loan and gone that way anyway. In terms of what they brought in, Marcus Thuram, very interesting free transfer from Borussia Mönchengladbach. I think any player getting out of that dysfunctional place will probably improve, and it's very interesting. Davide Fortese is a big buy from Sassuolo. Certainly was a player that Inter were hot in pursuit of, and I'm sure everyone else wanted across Italy. Christian Aslani was already around, I think, and I don't really know this Jan Aurel Bisek they bought at center back. But bringing in Jan Sommer as a replacement for Onana adds some ability to create out of the back at goalkeeper, which is probably going to be very interesting. I don't know that Onana did as much of that as kind of was expected. But Lautaro Martinez is still there. I don't see Edin Dzeko on this roster, so that's a big difference. We'll see how he gets on playing with other players. But Lautaro was so good last year. Deserves to be the captain. It's kind of interesting to see him with the captain's armband. This squad is awesome, very deep and really talented. And brought in Aldero also from Sampdoria, who had been recently relegated, as a very good, I think, backup goalkeeper potential option there. Next, I'll move to AC Milan, who are valued even more, a lot more, almost $100 million more, or 100 million euros more than Inter Milan, which is surprising because Inter have dominated this rivalry. That seems a little bit weird to me. Stefano Pioli still around. He's been around for a while, since 2019 even, and has done very well with this club. They did a lot of great buys, but they also had their director of sport move on, which was a little weird, and they spent a lot of money. Maybe he was really pissed about the sale of Sandro Tonali to Newcastle in the Premier League. They also lost Rebic on a free transfer to Besiktas in Turkey. Matteo Gabbia left for Villarreal. Don't think that's a huge loss. Junior Macias moved on. Daniel Maldini is on loan. Both of them on loan, I guess. All three, including Gabbia, on loan as a young center back. But not huge losses, especially when you're bringing in Loftus-Cheek for 16 million euros, Pulisic for 20 million euros. Not sure I'm really bullish on either of those Chelsea departures, but Samuel Chukwueze is so fast on the right wing, coming over from Villarreal. Great left foot as well. Also bringing in Okafor at center forward. It's going to be really, really pacey up front. And Yunus Musa coming back, or I guess coming over from Valencia, is a nice little acquisition there too. Some good acquisitions that I certainly believe in. Some I don't. I wonder how Giroud is going to fit in at 36 years old, probably super sub at the kind of moonlight of his career. Divock Origi, also at 28, has shown that he can score off the bench for Liverpool and for Milan. But we'll see what happens with all that sort of stuff. It almost feels like they're kind of changing a little bit who they are, want to have a little bit more pace. Still, and the center back position has been really young for Milan, and they're valued at really high numbers. Tia at 20 million, Kalulu for 30 million, Tomori for 40 million, though I feel like there's a little bit of an English upgrade or inflation there. Magnan, if they can keep him healthy, is a great goalkeeper. I mean, this is a good team. We'll see really what they end up looking like throughout the entire season, and we'll see if they can really get over that hurdle of their in-city Milan rivals, Inter, because they've not done well against them in the past. And last but not least, we had come to the Scudetto winners from last season. Only a few million euros more valuable than Milan. And certainly something that we're going to look into a lot this season. I can say that. But Napoli, I mean, we're so good and then really kind of fell apart. Champions League had a lot of injuries really that came about with Victor Osimhen. He's still around, worth 120 million euros. Let's see how long he sticks. But until he's gone, he's definitely a big, big threat, as well as Vicha Kvaratskhelia, who has an injury designation next to him. Hopefully he's not out for too long. Anyway, Rudy Garcia has come in as Napoli manager because their successful manager from last season has decided he didn't want to coach this year, which is bizarre to me. Italiano, I think it was. Bizarre, very bizarre, but good for him, I guess. And maybe he's made enough money or something like that. Rudy Garcia, formerly of Marseille and most recently Lyon, really had a lot of trouble. And we'll see, because he's going to have huge expectations this year. They lost Kim Min-jae to Bayern Munich for 50 million euros. That's big. Tanya left, but he was already gone. Luperto's already gone. So it seems like the only real loss was Kim Min-jae. In terms of arrivals, Raspadori was already around. Simeone was already around. Jens Cajuste came in from Stade Reims in France, which is a big addition. Also a couple other names I don't really know. Nathan, a center back from Red Bull Salzburg, I believe, or Bragantino, which might even be Brazil, I guess. Anyway, so we'll see how they replace Kim Min-jae, because he was so important to them. We'll see how healthy Kvaratskhelia is. I think it's going to be really hard for Napoli to live up to the expectations of last season. Certainly they have a lot of talent to do it, or valued the most talented squad in all of Serie A, but I have some questions about them, to say the least. Their goalkeepers are pretty young, so that's a good thing. But I question really the loss of Kim Min-jae and seeing how they live up to expectations. I think that's going to be really hard on Napoli, and kind of feeling like that's a spot that I'd like to potentially look into maybe going against for this season. So we are now 57 minutes in, time to go through the futures, and then we'll come back with an ultimate best bet. Thanks for sticking around. I think there's going to be a value, and of course things change as the season goes, but feel free to slide us some DMs or hit me up if you want me to explain anything any further, or give even just takes on who these players are and what I think about them. Most of them I know, unless they play for RB Red Bull Bragantino. So looking at Italian Serie A odds, and this feels like one of the biggest toss-ups of any of the leagues I've covered so far. PSG big favorites, Manchester City big favorites. And then Barcelona, to me, I think we're the most likely to win, but we're ultimately second favorites based on the odds, with Real Madrid first, maybe with the Kylian Mbappe rumors. So when I look at Serie A, we have Inter Milan as the favorites at plus 225 at BetOnline, Napoli plus 275, Juventus 4-1, Milan, the AC Milan version, 5.5 to 1, and then Roma 11 to 1, Lazio 13 to 1, Atalanta 33 to 1. So interesting to see Atalanta at 3 times as likely to win, or 3 times less likely to win than Lazio, despite having a higher squad value. I don't know necessarily that. I certainly agree that Napoli should not be the favorites here. It's a little bit interesting considering how dominant they were last year, but it was really dominance for the first half of the season and maybe the first 2/3. And then things kind of got out of hand. They really didn't handle balancing Champions League and Serie A. So there's some big questions for me. I think, I'm a little bit interested in Juventus because they're very talented at 4-1. Though part of me feels that the status quo with Inter at 2.25 is odds on, makes a lot of sense. I think they are so dominant compared to Milan that I feel like even Milan at 5.5 to 1 just feel like a team that are kind of an outsider, despite having such a high squad value. Though you probably could argue that's a value play. You could argue Roma doesn't have enough up top at 11 to 1, especially they have to win all these matches throughout the entire campaigns. There's no playoffs or anything like that to catch up points. And certainly Tammy Abraham injury early is going to definitely impact some things. In terms of top 4 finish, Inter minus 450, Napoli minus 350, Juventus minus 200 or 1-2, Milan minus 185, Roma plus 125. So usually for the qualify for Champions League numbers, which is what we have here, and this looks like all we got for today, is I usually go to who's plus money and what is most likely to happen here. So the plus monies will have to invade the top 4 and kick out one of Inter, Napoli, Juventus, or Milan. I feel like Napoli are one of those sides that I think could fall out. I wouldn't be shocked because they'll be in Champions League. That'll be grueling. That'll be a big grind for them and could impact them quite a bit. Who do I think get in there? We have Roma at plus 125, Lazio plus 150, Atalanta plus 2 to 1. And Roma have a little bit easier of European commitments, I think, this season. I want to say they're in the Conference League, but I'm not sure. Roma Conference League. Let's see if that's what they're in. Let's see. I don't know. Let's see where they finished last season. Maybe that's the easy way to do this live. So they finished in the Europa League spot. They didn't win the Europa League final. So that's a tough situation to be in. Juventus in the Conference League should allow them to play a lot of backup squads, though. So that should be helpful and probably does push them into likely finishing in the top 4, and probably is the reason why they're the 3rd most likely according to BetOnline odds at the moment. Who's going to get knocked out of there? I mean, it's tough to say who would do it. Atalanta definitely have to battle in Europe, and that's going to be potentially complicated, or at least will complicate their season a lot more for a 5th place finish last year. I feel like if there's a way to get Napoli will not finish in the Champions League, the problem is finishing top 4 is not a huge ask for them. But I mean, all these clubs have European distractions. So it's really hard for me to say Atalanta in Europe, Lazio in Champions League. I feel like Lazio in Champions League would be interesting to me enough because ultimately they'll probably get knocked out in either the knockouts. Hopefully that's probably the best way to do it if you're rooting for them to perform better domestically, is to be in Champions League, get knocked out in the round of 16 rather than falling to Europe or something like that, or to the Europa League, because then they'll probably go long in that competition. That will certainly zap some of your interest in performing in Italy and Serie A specifically. So I think I've got an idea of where I'm going to go for my best bet, but stick around. Ultimate best bet coming end of show, which will come very, very shortly. I'll put it that way. So let's, I guess, go in and just to remind you, if you're on YouTube, please hit subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, a 5-star review would be really great. Ask any question in there. I will read it live as soon as I see one. Notice one. I try to check every time I sign on. Sometimes I forget, but I'll work that into the episode if possible. Thanks as well to all my Patreon subscribers. And if you haven't checked out patreon.com/thereal_G Warner, if you're a better of any type, all my stuff's going up there. Had a really good college basketball season last season. Baseball's been great this year. Stick around. There'll be more of that through the end of this season. Plus, I'll be putting up all the football stuff that I'm sure a lot of you will be betting on yourselves. But we'd love to make it more of a kind of idea exchange moving forward. Of course, get all my stuff, get my insight, my access. Ask me a question, I'll reply. Best place to do it is patreon.com/the_real_G Warner. So I think it's time to close this one down. And so let's get into the ultimate best bet. So I think let's do it. So this is Betting the Pitch, I think 216, the Serie A Italian top division soccer podcast. Check out the link in the promo code below. If you haven't signed up for Bet Online, go get an extra bonus. If you're not on Patreon or subscribe there, please do so. I think it's a really good way to get as most of your access to me as possible. Put a link in the description there as well. For my best bet for this Italian Serie A season futures, I'm going to go take a little bit of a long shot because I think it's a really, really likely battle at the top for champion. And I like AC Milan getting 5.5 to 1 odds plus 550 at BetOnline as we speak. They put in a ton of money into their squad. We'll see what the Chelsea additions look like, but this feels like a very competitive league at the top. I expect Napoli to come down. Inter Milan, I think, will have a little bit more trouble as a lower squad value than Milan this season, and Juventus are not the same team they have been in the past. So take AC Milan plus 550 to win Serie A this 2023-2024 season. And that'll do it for this episode of Betting the Pitch. Thanks for coming in. I've been podcasting like crazy the last few days. Hopefully the voice sticks around and still works. Any questions, slide on some DMs, the real_G Warner, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon. Hit subscribe for on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review. Ask a question in there. I'll bring it up. I'll put it on here. So hope to talk to you all soon. Still have a Bundesliga episode coming up shortly, probably tomorrow, hopefully, if I get that going. And then, as always, we'll get into the rhythm of having a weekend podcast for the soccer betting card every weekend, and then midweek and such going forward. So thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate the support, and let's go win some money.